We'll get started. We all have limited time. So good afternoon, everyone. Wanted to welcome you to the webinar hosted by the Supply Chain Analytics Institute at Rutgers Business School. We are delighted that you could join us today. Our keynote speaker today is Mr. Kevin Nelson. Kevin is the Chief Supply Chain Officer and the Chief Procurement Officer at Becton. If you're not speaking, kindly go on mute. Becton Dickinson, as you might know, is a global medical technology company that manufactures medical devices, instrument systems, and reagents. Kevin is a true veteran in the pharmaceutical and medical devices businesses with nearly 30 years of work experience. Kevin has been with Becton Dickinson for the last 15 years. Prior to that, he had had stints at Biogen and Millennium Pharmaceutical. His topic today is market dynamics and supply resiliency, a topic that's top of mind for most of us in supply chain. The format for this session will be as follows. In a minute or so, I'll turn over the meeting to Kevin. Kevin will run through the slides. I kindly request you to stay on mute unless you have a question to ask or you'd like to share your thoughts. You can also submit your questions in the chat box. Kevin will pause every few minutes, and between he and I, we'll read the questions and Kevin will respond to your questions. At the end of this presentation, which will take about 45-50 minutes, we'll open it up for a Q&A. And again, you can either unmute and ask the question, or you can type it into your chat box. So with that, let me turn it over to Kevin to start his presentation.
Great. Thanks, Sandy. So, Sandy, if you can, feel free to jump in, 45 minutes into it if that makes sense.
Okay.
And make sure that, I don't go too long here. So I'm just pulling my slides up now to share, get in presentation mode. Good afternoon, everyone. As soon as we're in presentation mode, I'll get started. And as Sandy mentioned, what we're going to share here today is really the supply chain challenges and resiliency. And no time better than actually today, in that we've got a number of things that are going on around supply chain resiliency. So I'll dive into them in a little bit here. So as soon as my slide comes up, I will get going. It's a bit of a pause here. All right, great, good. So you can see them okay, Sandy?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what I'll cover today, again, is really a little bit of an introduction to BD Medical Devices. I'll go through some macro supply chain risk exposure that we have, our mitigation strategies, and then focus on cost, quality, and service, and time permitting a little bit on ESG and so forth. So we could have, an hour-long session on each of these, but I'm going to go through kind of a high level here and give you an idea of kind of where we are today. So a little background on Becton Dickinson. We're a company that's been around for more than 125 years. I think the striking stat here is that we manufacture and ship 37 billion devices a year. Now, these range from syringes, very small single-use plastic items, all the way up to very large lab automation functions as well. We operate in 190 different countries, about $1 billion annually going into R&D and investing in new innovation, and 77,000 associates worldwide. The breakdown we have here from a revenue standpoint, about almost $19-20 billion in revenue, and it's divided up by the three different segments that I'll share here in a little bit. And on the right-hand side, you can see that our revenue is really, 57% in the US, 20% in Europe, 7% China, 16% rest of world. So really kind of heavily leaning towards US, North America. This is really a picture of all the different products, not everything, but a lot of different products. So we have 69,000 SKUs. And what that means is that we have a very, very broad platform. And if you're in a hospital in the US and even in the world, 90% of patients that are going into a clinic or hospital are going to use a BD product. So again, if you look at this list here, the BD medical segment on the top area, that top row, These are simple syringes that you're going to use for all your COVID shots, your flu, things like that, all the way through to the infusion pumps that you see in virtually every single hospital out there at this point. The next section is around BD Life Sciences. This is more the diagnostic area, and this is blood draws that you get. So we're the world's leader in the blood draw, the little vials that are collected.
I don't know how to send it.
And
No, it's in black.
if you can go on mute, please, thank you. We have all the way up to
inside.
larger lab automation tools and facilities, and then some of the diagnostic work as well that's done. Some of these are now handheld, all the way to kind of a desktop or something that would fill a room as well. So a lot of diagnostic work going on, and that really came prevalent within COVID and continues to be a big focus area. Last but not least is around interventional. Interventional is really kind of what it says. There's vascular access, urology, surgery, so hernia meshes, urology, which can be something as simple as a urine catheter, urine bag, and again, some of the things like a breast biopsy, bone biopsy as well. So very, very broad platform, a lot of things that we're buying, making, and shipping here too. So what I want to do now is really shift into the market dynamics and supply continuity. And keep in mind that we just went through a very, very broad platform. A lot of products that we have here that we're managing in a very global supply chain worldwide. And so this picture really is showing the last, 6 years of frequency of events, risk mitigation or disruptions, if you will, that took place here and continue to take place around the world. And you can see that factory disruptions really hit a spike back, 3 years ago with COVID, have come down, but they still aren't at an all-time low. We have port disruptions. There's a current one right now with the East Coast longshoremen strike. There are different regulatory restrictions that continue to be prevalent out there. So as you can see, many different disruptions that happen in the supply chain every day. And, I think contrary to what a lot of people thought here is that they've slowed down, but they're not going away. And that's really due to the fact that we become a very global organization, which a lot of companies are, and we're buying product, materials, components, raw materials from around the world. So there's impacts that I'm going to share here in a little bit, the ones I highlighted in red, the East Coast longshoreman strike and the Gulf Coast hurricane that's happening as we speak here, really different examples of what's transpiring each and every day. So the slide that I'm sharing here is really some of the macro supply chain events that we're keeping our eye on very closely. And I think a lot of our peers and certainly companies around the world are. And the number one uncertainty is really surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, U.S. elections. And we've done a lot of work even with our teams in Washington around what could the election mean. And we have one side of the aisle, if you will, that would be more of the same. Another side of the aisle that would likely result in significant tariffs, certainly in China, and maybe throughout the rest of the world as well. And there could be a lot of other things that could come with that too. So I'm going to get into a little bit about what are we doing about this stuff as we look at kind of the different risks here. This is what our board of directors asked. So when I presented to them here last week, in terms of, great, you're scaring us, but what are you doing about it? The next on the list here is supplier cybersecurity risks. We've seen an increase of those throughout as well. We've been monitoring our cybersecurity internally within Becton Dickinson here for a number of years. And only in the last couple of years have we extended that to the supply base, which has been very, very helpful. Geopolitical instability, you clearly understand that from Israel to Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, and so forth. These are things that continue to disrupt the supply chain globally. Global logistics uncertainties. Every day there's some sort of disruption, from a port closure to a strike to just challenges in different ports. One that I'll mention here is regulations, and that's I'll highlight a little bit more of that on the next slide. The increase in regulations is really very challenging, especially in healthcare. And every state, every country in the world is really coming out with more and more regulations in terms of what each area is trying to do. So if you think about the US, we have now the PFAS concern, which are the forever chemicals that, are in a lot of the different resins and a lot of different materials. And we have multiple states coming out with their own legislation, own kind of clarification of what they want and expect. So we have Maine, Minnesota, other states coming in as well. So the regulations continue to be a real challenge. Moving on here, we have US, China, rising costs and inflation, and then final labor and port disruptions as well. So I've highlighted here really the regulations because what I'd like to do is show a visual.
Excuse me, Kevin.
Yep, just go ahead.
A quick comment. What we see on the screen, we see your current slide and we also see the next slide.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay.
That's better. Thank you.
How's that? Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, I can't tell on my screens here. So, okay. So yeah, as we go through here then, what I'll do is we'll move into the next slide now, which is really the regulations. And this is really a slide that shows the number of regulations that are coming really around the world. Each year there's more and more things that are out there. So you take one simple product like a syringe and you have multiple countries, multiple states that have different regulations around materials of concern, meaning what they're willing to allow to be in their syringe, if you will. They have different regulations on how it's packaged, how it's delivered to a certain country or even a state. And the regulatory environment continues to be very, very challenging. So when you think about, what's driving healthcare, regulatory regulations are a major driver there because each of these SKUs for the country and state it's being delivered to oftentimes have to be customized for that particular regulation. So that's just an area that continues to be an area of focus for us. So what do we do about it then? Our focus that we started before COVID, before the pandemic, have been really to map the tier end supply chain. And I don't know if it was luck or strategy, but we started on this journey here about 5.5, 6 years ago. And really, I think what we've seen now is significant benefit by doing so. We've certainly leapfrogged a lot of our peers out there. And what we have here on this slide is kind of a mapping exercise where the blue bubbles are representing BD's tier 1 suppliers. So we send a PO, purchase order, to that supplier for a raw material, a component, a finished good, whatever it might be. They in turn are buying from the tier 2, who buys from a tier 3, 4, 5, all the way back to many times a rare earth mineral. And we didn't have visibility to that, and no one had visibility to that several years ago. We invested in a software platform to really look at and be able to assess where does this product come from? What's the entire supply chain here? So we've been able to map a significant portion of all of our finished goods all the way back to that rare earth mineral, which is very, very helpful. And what we found during COVID is that 80% of our disruptions were not happening with the tier 1 blue bubbles here, but with that tier N further back. And no one knew who that tier 2 or tier 3 supplier were. We didn't know where they were located. We didn't know if they had geopolitical challenges, financial struggles, whatever. And this mapping has unlocked, significant value for us as a company. And a lot of others now are moving this direction as well. So let me give you an example. The next slide here is really showing the tool, and it's using artificial intelligence where we will plug in our entire bill of material on a product. So again, let's use something as simple as a syringe. That syringe is going to have a glass vial. It's going to have a plunger, and it's going to have a little black rubber stopper, and then it's going to have some packaging. And that one product might have 4, 5, 6 suppliers here. And so what we've done here is that this example shows we have 10 BD products that we have assessed. And the 235 tier 1 suppliers that are showing on this particular slide are the tier 1 suppliers that we have. That's what we and most companies have typically managed. So we have quarterly business reviews with them. We know them intimately. We have rolling forecasts. We know their risk and everything like that. And at the end of the day, it really didn't matter. And the reason for that is we found that those 235 suppliers also were having 11,000 suppliers that they were in turn buying from. And that's where the costs were coming from. That's where the disruptions were coming from. And we had limited or no visibility to that at all. So this mapping has unlocked significant value, as I've talked about before. So now we can take this information and we plot it and we assess the risk. So take those 11,000 suppliers. And again, I mentioned earlier that we've got several hundred product families, product lines here. What we've done is we've worked with Washington, the FDA, our medical affairs team, and customers to identify what are the critical to healthcare product lines that BD makes. We've identified 119 product families here. And this could be the blood draw you get as you go down to the local blood draw area. It could be for diagnostic testing. It could be the infusion pump that you need to go to the hospital. All these different things are considered critical to healthcare, meaning if BD could not make that today, it could be a healthcare disaster. So what we've done is we've plotted the entire bill of material. And again, some of the bill of materials can have 5 items. Some of our complex, cell sorters and that can have 5,000 items in that bill of material. We've plotted every single one of those, and we've done the assessment on every supplier through the tier N. And this graphic here, the plot graph, shows that each of those suppliers then is plotted based on risk. And that risk could be that they could be a single source. They could be in a geopolitically strained area. They could have financial issues. They could have a number of different challenges here. That allows us to have the visibility to see, most importantly, what do we need to do to mitigate risk with this supplier, which could be tier 1, tier 4, tier 5, whatever. And on the right-hand side, this is the list of all the different mitigations that we have in flight now, which a few years ago, it would have simply been, we would have stocked on more inventory, we would have written a stronger contract, and that really doesn't do a whole lot when something happens, such as a pandemic or, things we're seeing today, like a hurricane. So we've really worked more on the dual sourcing, alternate materials, alternate suppliers, supplier performance work as well, things that are really changing what we do and how we do it as well. An example I would share here is on the next slide. This is something that, all of us have probably used. It's not fun, but it's something we've used. This is really that blood collection winged infusion set that we manufacture. It's the world market leader. And this is where typically companies will look at the mitigation would be in the 4 walls of your manufacturing plant. And we have multiple production lines that are making these units, and they're in South Carolina, they're in Europe, and they're in Greater Asia. We make these all over the world. And the focus would have been there. However, that doesn't do anything if there's an issue with the supplier that's providing the resin or the sleeve or the lure adapter. So we've worked back through this tier N and worked with the suppliers to mitigate risk that each of those can have as well. Then we've gone to that resin provider and gone back to where that's made. So a lot of the resin, 84% of the resins we get come out of the Gulf Coast of the US. And guess what? There's a hurricane hitting Florida today or tomorrow, and that's a high hurricane area. So that also requires then a mitigation strategy whereby we take a lot of resins and we move it out of the Gulf Coast. We put it on railroad cars. We locate it in different parts of the US to mitigate against that type of potential risk. Going on here, we have the steel that goes into the cannula, the needle. There's lubricant, there's silicones. All these different components now are being mitigated, whereas before it was the manufacturing plant. Now it's every single component of every single item that we have. So really, truly a kind of a game changer for how risk is mitigated within not only our company, but certainly the other big med techs too. And what I'd like to show now is really kind of a real-time risk scenario. This is happening, as I mentioned a bit ago, as we speak. The tool we use really is showing, we have a hurricane coming into Florida. And more importantly, we have all of our suppliers, tier 1 through N, mapped. And the blue kind of column here, I kind of blocked them out so you can't see the names of the suppliers. these are the suppliers that are located in that kind of that area of focus here. So this has allowed us, within several days' notice, to work with them to make sure that we've got product getting out of their facility, moving it elsewhere in the country, or stocking up with more inventory, doing something to mitigate the potential risk here. Because what we find is that you think about a hurricane could come through and it could do major damage. You could be down for days or weeks and everything. But even if you're down for a few hours, a lot of these manufacturing plants, including ours, are running 24/7. And if they're delayed, if there's a delay in production for 3, 4, 5 hours, and you're running 1 billion products a year, it's going to take months to catch back up to that. So that's how critical the supply chain is here, to make sure that you don't impact the critical to healthcare product line by having a tier 3 supplier located in South Carolina be down for half a day. So the visibility here is just absolutely incredible. This is what allows us now to do it. So what we do with this information is we take all these suppliers and we map out here something that you may have learned in that too, is the time to recover, time to survive. Time to survive meaning that tier 2 supplier in South Carolina may have 2 days worth of inventory, meaning that they've got 2 days where we can survive before they're out of product and we suddenly have an issue. We may have a couple more days of inventory in our facility, so we've got 4 days total of inventory, but the time to survive is then. I just mentioned a little bit ago that time to recover could be months based on a plant's inability to ramp up and to catch up to the backlog that can happen here. So this is critical information and data that shows of a very complex supply chain. We may have an issue of a time to recover that could be days or weeks. This is information that we end up having to, share with our customers to say, listen, there was a disruption here with the hurricane, and we're going to have to now allocate who gets what, how much, and when, and hospitals have to adjust accordingly, which is very, very painful for everyone and can really impact healthcare too. So one area before I take a pause here, I'm going to touch on is we run scenario planning events. And this is one where we've run several times now. As an individual in the little picture in the lower left-hand side here, a gentleman who was the head of supply chain for the Biden administration. You can see he was here at the Obama administration as well. He resigned here about 2 years ago in Washington, and we hired him as a contractor for BD. So he's only allowed to work for BD, and he helped us create basically this whole program, this whole plan. What we did is we ran the same simulations that they used to run in DC in basically in the cabinet members. And we would sit down with our board of directors, we'd sit down with their leadership team, and we'd say, here's a scenario. We have basically, the global trade challenge with Taiwan and China. And what he would do, same thing he would do with Washington, is he would inject various scenarios here throughout the day. One example would be that, a fighter jet from China just flew over Taiwan in their airspace, and someone fired a missile in air or whatever. And within 3 minutes, the Strait of Taiwan is shut down, the ports are closed, and things start to escalate. He would then add another injection, another one, all the way to the point where we have Wall Street analysts calling to say, what does this mean for BD? Are you impacted? What does this mean? We have customers calling to say, what does this mean? Because we know we get PCBA boards that go into our infusion pumps from China. What does this mean now? So this is the type of exercise and event that is exciting, very stressful. And you can imagine that this is what they were doing in Washington. We were doing it here as well. And it's exhilarating, but it's also, it exposes a lot in terms of what you don't know. And after doing a bunch of these, we've seen that, this transparency, this information has been critical really in managing the supply chain really in a more effective way. So let me pause there. I know I've kind of talked a lot and very quickly here. We're about halfway through the session. I'll pause just for a second, see if anyone has maybe a quick question or comment on the mitigations before we get into, kind of, beyond risk, what else we need to do to mitigate challenges. Okay. All right, we'll keep moving then. And again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or we'll open up for Q&A at the end here. And so, if I think about back a slide, we're not only focused on risk, but healthcare has a challenge around cost, service, making sure we don't have back orders, and there's been a lot of challenges around that recently, and quality too. Quality is always paramount. And we've typically used the same levers that every industry out there will do. And you'll go through a methodology, you'll map your product lines, you'll map your categories, everything like that. And here I have an example of really kind of the different 2x2s that we would use to understand kind of what our position is. In the far left-hand side, we have the category positioning, where you can see suppliers that are kind of down in the low bottom quadrants there. They have custom products or proprietary, meaning that these suppliers have products where they own the design, they own the IP, and we have no option. We have very little leverage. We can't do anything else. So it's not a great position to be in. And we have a lot of those. And I think medical is like that, where you work with someone to develop a particular product. They'll oftentimes engineer into that product, one of their components, their IP, whatever it might be. Moving to the middle 2x2 then, you can see that the balance of power. So going back to the left-hand side, you have one. All right, let's follow this through. You have West in the lower left-hand corner under custom. They make a very custom black plunger that is going into all of our syringes. Now you go to the balance of power here, that's a critical supplier. We're very dependent on them, and they know that. Go to the far right here, you can see that they're down in the right-hand corner, meaning that they know that they have the leverage and they can exploit us. So they have the ability to raise prices. They have the ability to dictate what they're going to ship and when and everything. And it's clearly in our best interest as a company to see how can we dual source, create alternates, suppliers, alternate materials, and so forth. That's the typical type of exercise we would do to, again, mitigate risk, try to address the cost challenges that we have, and make sure we don't end up with all of our eggs in the proverbial, one basket here. So the typical process would be what I've highlighted or circled here in the sourcing bucket. And that's where you go through your 5-step, 7-step methodology. You go through and you would negotiate, you would try to get alternate materials, you would try to get alternate suppliers and stuff like that. And that's going to typically really result in, benefits to a company. And that's going to contribute to maybe inventory reductions, better GP, things like that. But it's really not the entire end-to-end. So the journey we've been on here is really this end-to-end, which I'm going to share here in a little bit. So the sourcing excellence that I have here, a couple examples that would be included here are should costing. Should costing is an exercise where we have analysts that will look at a product being on the left-hand side here, cervical brush kit, and something very simple, very basic. We buy this from a outside supplier, and they ship it to us. It costs $1.99, very inexpensive. We went through a should costing to say, based on the labor to manufacture that swab, that little cup and everything, the machinery that's utilized, the scrap, the tooling, the batch setup, the direct manufacturing cost, the overhead of the supplier, where they're located and everything. We have a should cost that says that product should cost 57 cents, not $1.99. So in a validated industry, you don't want to go and, switch suppliers immediately. You want to use this information and try to negotiate out the lower cost, which we're able to do. So worked very well. Should costing, very, very helpful lever here. We're able to drive cost out, benefits everyone, the customer, us, the patient, so forth. We also then follow the typical kind of charts. The resin that goes into that particular, product that we just saw, will fluctuate, really daily. And we have very robust, hedging programs where we're trying to buy different types of resin based on where the market's moving and everything. Very challenging to do. We're trying to really mitigate some of the fluctuation that can happen here. And this market will go up and down based on, simple increases or decreases in production. Large resin manufacturers, they'll kind of manipulate the market as they see fit. So now let's move into, just briefly here, and we'll open up the questions here in a little bit, is really the levers that we've deployed here well beyond the sourcing excellence bucket. So we've been on a journey now recently that's having major impact, that's really moving the needle, and that's looking at what we would typically do internally in a manufacturing environment. We would go through a Kaizen approach in our internal manufacturing facilities. We would try to reduce waste. We would try to increase OEE, reduce scrap, all these different things. We're now deploying that to our supply base. So instead of going to a supplier and saying, we want to negotiate with you and try to reduce your margin, try to maybe have them, negotiate with their suppliers differently, we've taken this approach now where we have engineers go on site, much like we would at our plant, and we work with them to try to lean out their manufacturing process. So something as simple as a supplier may have 20% in waste that's coming off their line. If we're able to go in there and work with them to reduce that waste, that benefits them and it benefits us. And it results in a piece price reduction the day we can do that together, and we share that with them as well. If we're able to go in there and get more product coming off that unit, so if we can increase OEE, they can spread their overhead costs differently, and there's a piece price reduction immediately. So these are the win-wins that have allowed us to go in and not negotiate margin, but to really go in and work with the suppliers to see how we can work together, and they can take those learnings, apply it to their other customers, and actually increase their margin. So these benefits have really unlocked major improvement for us. And some of the different examples you can see here are quality, cost, and delivery. These are eye-popping numbers. Defect rate improvements, stock out improvements, customer satisfaction, material cost reductions, and things like that. The typical negotiation is going to warrant 3, 4, 5% max. We're now talking about some major improvements here that are driving significant reductions and improvements in healthcare, which I think we can all agree that are really, much, much needed. So my final slide before I wrap it up here is really coming back, bringing this back into the responsible sourcing element and responsible supply chain. Everything we do is really through a lens of trying to make sure that we're doing it, making sure that we're applying, fair human rights to our supply base, to the tier N, meaning that we map that tier N supply base and make sure that they're paying their workers fair. They're providing the right accommodations for them as well. We are driving supplier sustainability, meaning that the scope 3 ESG is being addressed, that the suppliers have to accommodate that, where they're trying to not put anything into ground waste and reduce water consumption, things like that. We are focusing on supplier diversity and activating more of that. We're actually working on some stuff with Rutgers as well. That's really shown some improvement there. The supply chain resiliency is what I've really focused on this conversation today around what we need to do to mitigate risk there. Supplier cybersecurity, we've gone from kind of, behind everyone to leapfrogging them in terms of what we do. And all of this turns into really the benefit for the customer is that it has the end-to-end transparency. So when we go to a major hospital in the US or around the world, we can now really be confident that everything that they're buying, that particular finished good, if it's a syringe or if it's a very complex lab automation piece of equipment, is that entire supply chain is ethical, responsible, and really working to improve, the world and the environment as well. So that's kind of the focus that we have here. I've gone through a lot in 36 minutes. I didn't think I'd get through the whole thing, but we could certainly have many more slides here too, and I'm happy to come back another time. But Sandy, with that, why don't I open it up and see if there's any questions that have come in or if there's any on the line.
Yeah, there are quite a few questions that are stacked up. Are you able to see the chat box, or would you like me to read them?
I'm not. Let me see if I can find it here.
If not, I can read them for you.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that? I don't see it.
Okay. So first question is, how do you incorporate your single or multi-sourcing supplier strategy into your resiliency planning?
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest ones we have, and I get asked by the board of directors all the time about how many suppliers are single or sole source, and those are, we have 13 criteria in the mitigation assessment, and one of the key ones is going to be, are they a single or sole source supplier? And if they are, that is one of the determining factors in terms of what do we need to do to mitigate that. So there are times when that single source supplier, sole source, is going to own the IP and you cannot move away. You can't go to an alternate, right? That's going to then dictate that we have to have a different mitigation plan in terms of how to make sure that that's secure. And it could be through a more open, transparent relationship with that supplier. It might mean stocking more inventory with them and with us. It could be a stronger contract as well. And then to the contrary, if there's not certain IP, we always try to go out and dual source, find another alternate supplier, alternate material that we can source from as well. So the single and sole source are very critical in determining the mitigation strategy.
That's great. Thank you. The next question is, can you talk about any technology tools that BD uses that help with the TRN mapping and AI capabilities? Namely, Neuros, Everstream, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So we do use Everstream, and we've been using them very early on. And then we also have some additional technology internally that we built to really supplement that AI and some of that TRN mapping. So it's kind of a combination of two things there. But Everstream has really been the one that we've used and worked with them on. We've continued to be kind of the beta test for them in terms of when they have a solution created, we're working with them on kind of what's next 2 or 3 years out, and working to see if we can get that to be sustainable as well. And right now we've got some really incredible visibility here that can really do kind of link in with our control tower to kind of follow product as it moves around the world, and in addition to the mapping as well. So that technology has been really good, and there's emerging technologies that are popping up everywhere, and we continue to monitor them as they come forward.
That's great. Another related question, what external data sources and the tool do you use for reconstructing and analyzing BD's end tier?
Yeah, that's very similar to the last one then, right? Where I think, the tool we use is really gathering the data. So that AI is really looking at different kind of shipping routes around the world. That, Everstream, I think, was started by DHL, and that's using artificial intelligence to really kind of look at shipping around the world from different suppliers. So that's how they're going back and seeing that, this tier one supplier is having product delivered or coming in from other areas throughout the world. And they've been able to map that through whatever technology here to be about 90+% accurate, which has been really, really great. So we were trying to do this before through supplier surveys and saying, hey, where are you buying from? And then going to that supplier and saying, where are you in turn buying from? And we just couldn't get any response. So for 2 or 3 years, we just had little to no information. This has been a breakthrough. It's still developing rapidly, and I think there'll, again, be more out there that can really come and disrupt even this technology.
Great. The next question says, how soon can the system capture the disruption and create the mitigation strategy and implement it? You mentioned about real time, but can it be real time for all tiers?
It's pretty good for all tiers, assuming you have everything mapped. So if we take our 119 critical to healthcare products, those are mapped down to the tier M. So what we did is, that one plot chart that I showed you had our suppliers on there, and that's moving around kind of by the day. And now that's going to look very different with a hurricane coming into Florida. And the supplier that's in the upper right-hand quadrant here, a week ago, is going to be completely different today. So it's going to move, I call it real time. There's probably a lag of a day or two, quite frankly, based on just the information that's coming through and pulling from our ERP systems and everything. But that's very helpful for us to be able to react. And what it won't do, though, it's not going to give you the mitigation plan. It's going to show you that, hey, here's risk here based on one of the 13 different criteria. In this case, it's a weather event. Now it shows that, again, we've got a tier 2 or tier 3 supplier that might be in South Carolina that's providing a very critical component. We now need to go in there and say, okay, what do we do? Can we get product that's going to get shipped out of the area? Things like that, or even work with them and their local government in terms of making sure that they've got power, that they've got people that can be, on site and so forth. So it allows us the visibility to be a little bit more proactive, if you will.
That's great. You may have already answered the next question, but I'll read it anyway. What software platforms do you use to render your risk mitigation dashboard?
Yeah, I did. That's definitely the Everstream one and the internal combination as well. And then we are actually looking at another couple tools right now too that are kind of in beta, relatively new. I'm on the advisory board of another company that really can't share at this point, but there's more disruptive technologies coming. So I would say there's probably one or two today that are really good, and there's going to be another half dozen that are going to be pretty exciting here in the next 12 to 18 months.
Great. The next question says, if you couldn't negotiate the price down to your target cost, would you insourcing be considered?
Yeah, we do a lot of that. And I think that was probably a move that, Becton Dickinson and a lot of manufacturing companies did for many, many years. I saw it as being used too much, where we would vertically integrate a lot, even if we didn't know how to make it. We would bring it in, and because you didn't have to now, have a margin that you had to overcome, typically you could do it for less, right? But what we found is that you vertically integrate so much, and it's not your core competency. You've added a ton of complexity, you've added a ton of bricks and mortar, and with that comes challenges. So we have lots of extra people that are doing very simple manual assembly, manual labor, and they might be in a market in the US, they might be in Mexico, they might be in a lower, third world country, but it's added to the complexity, I think, too. So we've actually are starting to reverse that now and moving more out based on a full architecture kind of reassessment here to see what should we be making, which is a core competency, versus what could be and should be done in another area where it might be the core competency of another supplier.
That's great. The next one is a two-part question. So I'll read the first part and then I'll give you a chance to answer that. How do suppliers react to the initiatives of BD sending teams to improve their manufacturing process?
Yeah, great question. And it depends is the answer. So what we find is that if we call a supplier and say, hey, we'd like to come in there, we'd like to bring a team of people in and look at your equipment and see how we can try to drive cost out, that's not going to be seen as a very welcoming type of initiative. What we try to do is sit down and explain, here's our challenge today, here's what we're trying to do, and we want to collect some data information. And based on that, we like to come in and work with you, not to squeeze margin, but to see how we can increase capacity, how we can drive more efficiency, how we can reduce waste and everything like that. And the vast majority have said, we'd love to have you in. There are a few that say we don't want you in because we have a very proprietary process to make product and how we make it. And they're fearful that we're going to come in there and we're going to say, okay, now we know how it's made and we're going to vertically integrate it. So we have to sign a lot of NDAs, CDAs and everything, and make sure that it's a very open, transparent relationship. And the very first day that we'd ever go in and do that and then vertically integrate it would be the last day we ever run that type of initiative.
The second part of this question is, what is the scale of these supplier development improvement activities at BD?
Say that again, Sandy. I missed the first part of it.
What is the scale of these supplier development and improvement activities at BD? I don't know if they mean the investment or money spent or resources.
Yeah, it's turned into a flywheel. So we've been doing that internally in our plants now for a number of years, and we've seen the benefit there. You're never done. The Kaizen is this, continuous, waste out type of exercise. So we've done hundreds and even thousands of them internally. And when we started doing them with our suppliers, we found that same thing. Getting in there and doing it the first time costs some money. We ended up having an outside firm help us because we did not claim to be the experts there. So we had an outside firm come in and help us, and we funded that. But as we kind of walked out of there with a piece price reduction, that's helped enable us to be able to fund the next event and the next event, and the next event. So the flywheel is really working here nicely at this point.
That's great. Do you have a data science or analytics team working with the supply chain management group?
Yeah, we do. We do. So we set that up a few years ago, and I'm very proud of them. So it's literally probably 6 different analysts, data scientists that we have here, and they were a little bit of our superpower, if you will. So when we started going through and doing design to value and should costing, these were the folks that took us from kind of the simple negotiation and dual sourcing into a very thoughtful, analytical way to work with a supplier, like I shared with that one cervical kit here, and say, hey, here's what we're seeing from an analytics standpoint of what this should be costing. And we're not trying to catch them in terms of saying you're charging us too much, but we're going in to say, hey, we think that, you know, the cost of whatever labor, overtime or something might be too high. We'd like to talk through and see how we can help you, you know, address that, lean it out. Maybe we're sending a forecast that's resulting in you having to run a weekend shift at overtime. And if we can address that, maybe it's going to work out better for you and us and not have to pay the upcharge there. So that data scientist team has really, really been helpful. And I think it's going to be a key part of that going forward. I've also seen that with a lot of our hospitals that are saying they too are starting to hire those individuals because they want to understand how BD is making our product and what the should costing is for our product and the tier end supply chain as well. So it's really starting to build across the entire spectrum.
That's great. The next question is quite interesting. It says, just like Israeli operatives managed to get explosive into pagers in Lebanon at a large scale, can bad actors get into BD's supply chain that can harm consumers or medical professionals?
Yeah, it's actually a very good question. So we've been doing a lot of work on monitoring any and all product coming in from certain countries, and especially around PCBAs, any types of wafers, boards, and things like that. They all go to a third-party company who's going to do a full assessment and scrub before we receive those in and put those into a BD product. And so that's a very big concern. And I think, you know, we've seen it for a number of years now where even some of the ports in the US have cranes that are coming in from certain parts of the world, certain countries, and apparently they've been tracking product that's being offloaded and everything too. So, you know, we see the espionage as being a real threat. We see even more sinister things that could happen as well. So we're monitoring that very, very closely. And there are certain products that we won't source from certain areas of the world for that reason alone.
Next question, can you share more about the current supply chain event experience you mentioned in your presentation?
When you say event, give me an idea of what that event is.
I'm just reading what was typed into the chat box.
Yeah, read it again, Sandy, if you can.
Can you share more about the current supply chain event experience you just mentioned in your presentation?
Okay. Yeah, I think the event, probably the one that I think maybe it was the event that we were talking about, the scenario where we had the individual from Washington help us. I'm guessing that might be it, right? And so, you know, that was the event that we've run now several times and really very exciting, where again, he brings in different kind of injects and offers them to the leadership team. And you see a leadership team, and his comment was interesting where we've gone through this now a number of times. Every time we've done it, his comment is that we are 100 times better than the cabinet in Washington. So these are typically individuals who are elected to a position without a lot of background. And we've worked a lot with, you know, Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of every cabinet member, right? And it's fairly true in that a lot of them were elected without really understanding or knowing commerce or transportation. So it's been a real good learning experience. And we've gone from 0 to 60 based on that too, which I think has been very helpful because we found now that we deploy that same type of mentality when there's a hurricane with the longshoreman strike as well. So anytime you see any disruption on the nightly news, you can almost bet that there's going to be either a BD product, a J&J product, a Medtronic product that's going to be impacted by that somewhere in the world. So it's just that it's that prevalent out there.
Great. Just one more question. I think that's pretty much the end of the chat questions.
Okay.
How can technology help in this process, perhaps with regards to scenario planning?
Yeah, I think technology is going to be really the key. So we had been doing it, as I mentioned before. We were attempting to do it manually, and essentially resulted in that we weren't doing it. You're just not able to do it or do it effectively based on the manual process here. Technology, I think this is going to be one of the bigger explosions, if you will, in kind of a disruptive technology, being able to really monitor, map, and mitigate supply chain challenges, and even do it from an end-to-end standpoint. So, instead of just looking at the four walls of your plant, going all the way back up through the supply base, all the way through to the customer, I think will really be, who gets there first is going to win. That ability is really going to be, I think, the superpower that we have. And technology has to do it. There's no way you can manually do this. Companies have been trying for many, many years, and it just hasn't worked.
There's one follow-up question, that is, the Department of Commerce just released a tool called SCAI. Do you have the chance to use it?
I have not used SCAI, and we work with Secretary Raimondo a lot on different initiatives, and our chairman is actually on the supply chain resiliency, co-leads the team with her. I have not personally used SCAI. I will follow up on that after we get out of this and see if it's something of value to us. But at this point, we have not used it. Our chairman just co-hosted an event with Secretary Raimondo here. I think it was 2 weeks ago. And he shared a few of the slides that I've gone through. I gave him my slide deck, and he shared that. And her response was that no one else in healthcare is doing this. You guys are way ahead of the industry here. And we've done a little consulting with her as well and her team in terms of kind of what's needed to help make more resilient supply chains. So I've not seen SCAI, but I'm guessing it might be similar in terms of some of the different components we've talked about today.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. That brings us to the end of the chat questions. We still have a few minutes left. If anyone would like to either put any questions into chat box or unmute and ask the question.
Yeah, I'll have one over for Sundar for Kevin. Kevin, very impressive presentation, particularly on the line of sight. I'm curious, how do you manage your tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, particularly because our company is a diverse company in the auditing space. I'm curious on how you manage that. Tier 1s, I can understand, probably you have that relationship, but tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, how do you stay on top of that? That's going very deep upstream. Yeah, particularly in the auditing area, because that's kind of our space.
Yep. Yeah, Ruben. So what we've done here is you can imagine. So, we work with a few very big, large contract manufacturers, and it's easy for us to work with that large manufacturer and say, we need you to manage your tier 2, 3, 4 suppliers. And it's easy to train them to do it. It's easy to kind of get them to do contracts around what needs to happen with their tier N supply base as well. Where it gets tricky is when you go to a smaller tier 1 supplier.
Are they here?
And you tell them that we need you to manage your supply base in a certain way. That's been a lot of the training work we've done with that kind of mid-tier supply base to really work with them to teach them how to do it. And we find, time and time again, that a lot of these smaller suppliers are out there merely placing POs, not really negotiating, not really, providing rolling forecasts on that. And there's a big opportunity there. We've seen significant cost reductions, service improvements, and things like that. So I would say, to answer your question, it's been really through a training lens that we've tried to apply it to work with them to help us manage the tier N. And there are times too, and we'll do a direct contract with the tier N, or even a three-way contract as well, to make sure that their SLAs they can meet on behalf of what our needs are.
Thank you, Kevin. There are many comments in the chat box about how impressive the BD's approach has been, and of course, your outstanding presentation. So let me share them with you and say this has been a very informative session.
Good.
Appreciate you taking the time today to go through that with us. supplier resiliency is only going to get even more critical over time, either because of weather changes, geopolitical situations. So it's a very timely topic, and undoubtedly BD is way ahead of the others. So thank you for taking the time and joining us today. And thank you for our audience. I think they asked some very good questions.
Yeah, great questions.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much to everyone who joined as well today. And Sandy, if there's any more questions that come in afterwards, I'm more than happy to try to get back to folks.
Absolutely. We'll do that. Thank you and have a wonderful evening all.
You too. All right. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kevin.
Yep. Bye-bye.